Hello, and welcome to the Getting Ready for SharePoint 2010, bracket and 2013, end of extended support. We're going to give people joining on Teams a couple of minutes to get on, and then we'll get right into it. Cool. So I'm Beth. If anyone misses this bit, won't be the end of the world. So I work for WM Reply, and I'm in the adoption and change management team. So most of my experience so far has been managing migrations, managing process for migrations, which we'll go into a little bit of detail about in the webinar, and just ensuring that when we do take people on this journey, that they know what's happening when, and also that they're ready to use whatever new tool or platform it is we're taking them to.
And hello, I'm Liam. I'm a managing consultant at WM Reply. You'll find me on the technical side of the projects generally, leading the projects. I specialise in Office 365 and automation in particular, so things like Power Automate, Powerups, things like that. So today we're going to take you through who we are, WM Reply, very quickly, give you an overview, what's going on with the 2010 support deadline, how to prepare for that, how to migrate, and then take some questions at the end.
Be kind.
So first of all, who are we?
Cool. So we operate under Reply, which is a global network of consultancies. And what it means is that the 130 plus consultancies that operate under that umbrella are all really specialised in one practice or technology. And what that means for our clients is basically, if we can't do it for you, we know a really, really great company that can help you. So a bit more about what WM do. We specialise in digital workplaces and external websites, so extranets and external sites built on Sitecore, and creating digital workplaces and helping our clients realise that modern workplace through Office 365. So on the digital workplaces side of things, which is more relevant to the types of migrations we'll be talking about today, it encompasses SharePoint, Teams, Yammer, but more recently we are doing a lot more work with the Power Platform, and that's sort of building apps for our clients' processes and things they manage in-house, and also using it during projects, so using the Power Platform in communications, enabling users, which we'll talk about in a little more detail. And then in terms of our experience, so, excuse me, I'll just tell you anyway, we're in the Teams Champion Network, which basically means Microsoft would recommend us as a Teams adoption partner. We are ProSite Change certified as well, so anyone in the adoption change management team got that certification. I think we're one of 2 Yammer adoption specialists in Europe. And we're a Microsoft Gold partner, but I'm pretty sure that's quite standard for Microsoft partners. And I remembered that with it on the slide. A bit more about what we do. So these are sort of the 3 work streams that we always try and include in our projects. So adoption and change management, which would be myself. Project management, which we all know what that is. It's timelines, resourcing and budget. And then the tech side of things, which would be Liam. So just sort of a bit more detail on the projects we deliver, that modern workplace strategy, which would sit with ACM, UX and UI, which is one of the newer units at WM Reply, but they've had really, really great success. And we would recommend it for any kind of product delivery, so intranets, extranets, things like that. Migrations, like I said, building those intranets and platforms for collaboration. And more bespoke business applications as well, which Power Platform is having a lot more involvement with these days. And then the Centre of Excellence, which is something our larger clients have been opting for, which is just a way to manage a demand funnel and be able to deliver in a really agile way.
Just quickly going through some of the things that we've done over the years with clients, particularly in relation to migration. So we have migrated from many different platforms over the years, and the first thing you can see that no 2 migrations are the same really. You have a lot of different types of sites, lots of different sizes of sites that need migration, and therefore a migration takes a pretty various amount of time, even for quite similar numbers of migrations.
Yeah, I think one thing to note as well is that what their existing sites and where they go to changes quite dramatically as well in a lot of the instances. So one thing we do recommend is sort of a 80-20 split in taking 20% of that information across with you.
And what happens is that different versions of SharePoint and different other platforms go through their natural life cycle, reach their end of life, and we find that we need to come to a migration. And that is exactly what we're here about today, because this year we are dealing with a 2010 support deadline, which is coming up. Now it's fast approaching. Now, this is pretty normal. Microsoft has a regular release cadence and a regular retirement cadence as well, so it's nothing surprising. We knew it was coming, but end of last year it was announced that 2010 will be doing extended support, will end in October 2020. So that means it is the end of line really for 2010. Now this doesn't just apply to 2010, because of course coming further down the road you've got 2013. Obviously mainstream support for 2013 has already ended, and so it's the extended support that's going to end again in 2023. Means it is end of life effectively. So while we're talking quite specifically about some 2010 migration elements, 2013 this applies just as much. So what in particular does the 2010 support deadline mean? Well, one, it does mean it's the end of the road. There are going to be no critical updates. There have been no critical updates for 2010 since 2016. All the operating systems that support the back end of 2010, they're reaching their end of life or they're already end of life. So all of the different server platforms that were supported in 2010, they're pretty much unusable at this point in time, or they've been replaced by things that work a lot better. And finally, there are going to be no security updates whatsoever after October 2020. Now this means that there's going to be a massive, massive security problem with your 2010 platform should you go beyond that.
Yeah, and I think one thing we've dealt with recently in migrating a client from 2007 is that because they were out of extended support, Microsoft were under no obligation to support us in that delivery. And there were definitely times where we would have liked to lean on them and get some insight on, you know, maybe previous projects and approaches. But, you know, in their eyes, they've given you quite a lot of warning. They do give you quite a lot of warning. So there is a driver to get that work happening sooner rather than later.
Pretty natural question from all this is, can I actually still use 2010 once this has taken place? And the basic answer is yes, you can do if you want, but there are quite a few risks. One of the key risks is that your systems are going to be vulnerable. With no security updates, that's going to mean you're going to have more vulnerable systems. So any problems that happen coming up and any security flaws that are found after 2010, they're not going to be patched in any way. That leaves it open to any sort of attack. Another issue with not migrating to 2010 at this point is sort of a calamity of factors that come together through the other things that we mentioned. So not having the platforms behind them being supported very well. Modern browsers aren't going to interact with SharePoint 2010 anymore. Modern functionality has really superseded. Users are used to a different way of doing things. This is old technology where very, very basic standard web pages. Newer platforms offer a much better user experience, and this is what they will be expecting if they're coming from another company, or even if they're used to using things at home. So you're going to end up with a lot of unhappy colleagues with a subpar product. The final thing is it's going to get more and more expensive. As we go through this process of SharePoint going end of life, there are going to be fewer and fewer people specializing in this. So the people who can keep it up to date and keep it moving, keep it working, they're going to become more and more expensive as they become more and more rare. So it's going to just be a very expensive thing for you. But pretty much the biggest problem is that it's going to be very vulnerable. And that leads you, it can open you up to having big catastrophic fines should any of these security issues come to pass. The question that comes after that is, where do we go from here? So at this time, if you're on a Microsoft platform, it's a pretty simple question with a pretty simple answer. There's one answer, which is in fact many answers. So Office 365. Back in 2010, SharePoint was a particular beast. It performed a lot of different functions, and we had a big wheel of all the things that SharePoint could do. That wheel has now been superseded by lots and lots of the products within Office 365. Things like collaboration, things like having conversations. We used to have like big conversations on SharePoint. Now you've got things like Yammer and Teams, which have taken over that part of the functionality, and even part of the file storage. So it's about where do you want to go? But the answer to that question is going to be Office 365.
Yeah, I mean, there is SharePoint 2019 if you've got certain compliance reasons that mean some of your data does still have to stay on premise, but the old party line is that MI5 are on Office 365, so it's good enough for James Bond, you know. Have a think about it.
Should be good enough for all.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also why migrations like this are a really good opportunity to start thinking about how you want your modern workplace to look. A big part of what we do is the mapping piece, and it means that, you know, what has the SharePoint usage in your business look like? Are there instances where that should sit on a team, or it should actually be a Yammer group, or in fact SharePoint isn't the right place for it anymore? We need to look at a more secure third-party application, and even the Power Platform. You know, we've got people using massive SharePoint lists as almost complaints or databases, and there's better ways to be utilising Office 365.
Absolutely. And so the question of where do you go from here really depends on lots of things. It depends on what sort of data you have. It depends what sort of systems you have. It depends what industry you work in, what geographical considerations you have. There's lots and lots of ifs and buts. But in general, we can help you make those decisions about what's the best place to migrate to. And one of the ways to help you make that decision is to make sure we get the proper preparation done for any sort of migration. Now, migration isn't just a case of lifting and shifting that data across. It's really far more complex than that. And as you can see, as we were saying, these can move to various different places within the Office 365 platform. So it's very, very important that you get a good idea as soon as possible and get all your ducks in a row so that you can prepare for your migration. Now, we've got bigger deadlines coming up. We've got extended support ending on 2 platforms. You could well say that, well, don't need to do any sort of preparation until a bit later for 2013. It's not true. The best idea is to get your preparation done as soon as possible so that you know the size of the project that you're going to be dealing with afterwards, and then you can fit it in appropriately.
Yeah, especially if there's other conversations in your business about digital workplace or end user experience. They are going to be massively impacted by a project like this. They're going to want to know, they're going to want to be a part of it. And if you sort of start off on your own path and you're not engaging those groups, they're going to slow you down.
Too true. So how do you prepare? That's the next question.
Oh, excuse me. So this part of the webinar, if you have joined and you're thinking, well, actually I'm sat on 2016 and I'm more interested in what it looks like to go from on-prem to online, this part of the webinar is much more just around the principles and our approach to migrating rather than simply, oh, I'm at end of life, how do I get onto SharePoint Online? Cool. So our first key piece of advice from our war stories is to prioritise. So when you're engaging on a project like this, there's going to be quite a few different agendas within the business, but it's really, really important to know, well, what is the driver of this project? So if it's budget, if, you know, we've got 100k, 1,000 sites, what's the simplest way to get them across? I guess we can look at that for you. Or if, you know, if it's time, so something like it is your end of life and 2010 is going out of support, you've got a deadline to hit, and that's going to be the main driver of your project. The quality of the content that comes across, so in things like intranet migrations, you don't want to lose the adoption, and you certainly don't want people losing, you know, a core business application that they're accessing every day. So the quality of that content coming across, being usable, being accessible in the same or better way is really key. User satisfaction. If this is going to be part of a wider adoption strategy, and, you know, moving to SharePoint Online is the first bit of visibility of Office 365 your people are going to have, you might be thinking this needs to land really, really well so that the perception of Office 365 is, you know, really high in the business. And evergreen as well, which is sort of a newer priority, but clients are definitely asking us about how can we ensure this migration actually means that this is the last migration we have to do and that we've moved to Office 365, Microsoft are looking after it all now. That is something we're getting asked about a lot because that's how the licenses were sold to them. So making sure that if you migrate, you go to modern pages, and that way any new releases, security updates, you're getting them straight away. So doing this exercise before you start on the project, it helps guide other decisions down the line. You know, you're going to get stakeholders coming to you saying, you know, we can't migrate because we've got X, Y, and Z happening. If time is your driver and compliance issues are going to cost you hundreds of thousands in fines, I think a business department coming to you saying we simply can't, there's going to be a bigger conversation there. And things will change during the migration process, believe me, things will happen. And having that priority set really helps you make quick decisions and be aligned across the board throughout delivery.
Beth and I have just come off of reaching the tail end of a pretty large migration project, and this actually represents the matrix that we were working with for them. And it's really helped us a few times during the project just to say, well, time is a priority over user satisfaction. They're on a 2007 platform, so they're already at risk. So that meant that time was the most important driver to them.
Yeah.
And this means that when it comes down to, are we going to make sure that the sites, the users are perfectly happy with the sites instead of migrating as much as possible? No, we're erring on the side of migrating as much as possible as soon as possible. So it's really important to have something like this to guide you and be your compass throughout the migration project.
Yeah, as an adoption person, I was shut down quite a lot thanks to this grid because time and budget were the drivers. But it's really useful even in sort of business case conversations as well. I think getting budget approved for something like this, showing that you have got a clear objective is really crucial.
So the next thing you do when it comes to preparation for your migration is to find out what on earth is going on in your environments already. So one of the key things though on a very technical basis is to find out what sort of content you've got lying around in your environment. So is it active content? Are people using it all the time? Is it compatible content with Office 365? Is it something that we're going to be able to move over, or are we going to have to find a new home for it? Is it something like communities on SharePoint are a great example? Are they going to move over to Yammer or to Teams? How are we going to manage that? How much of the data on there is sensitive? So do we need to take any security considerations while we're doing the migration or on the platform that we're going to be using once we get there? And we've got to think about other things as well as the content. So the architecture that's in place already, is it a stable architecture? Are we going to be able to work with it easily? We're going to be able to query it easily. We're not putting too much load on it when we're performing those queries. Do they have things like dev environments and test environments that we need to go through some sort of process when we're producing the scripts and things that we need to do the migration? We've got to know all these things in advance because that helps us know how long it's going to take. Then it's about getting access to all those systems. So what are the processes that we need to go through? How long do those take? Who needs to answer those questions? Are there any special pieces of software that we need to have access to? A vault where they keep all the passwords for these live systems? We need to know all this before we start, and the key thing there is that we're getting an idea of the shape and the size of this project and the amount of time that it's going to take for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we would always recommend as a bare minimum a proof of concept, and we would always like to do a pilot because there's planning it and then there's actually doing it, and there's something that always comes out of the woodwork. But for me as a change person, my investigation is much more about user cases. You know, how are people currently using this platform in your business? Are they using it correctly? Is there an education piece that needs to happen? But my sort of personal objective in these projects is to make sure that we're never losing functionality. I always want, as a minimum, people to be able to do what they did before, and hopefully they can do a bit more with the education around the platform we're giving them. So defining things like user personas, mapping out those end user journeys, and just making sure we've captured as much of the user cases as we can. I think it'd be bold to say you're ever going to capture every user case, especially in enterprise level migrations. You know, in the training I was learning things every day around how people are using SharePoint in ways that we probably wouldn't recommend either, but they're still important to know because there could be a business critical process sat on SharePoint that you've got no idea is happening. So I think the analysis teamed with having conversations with people is really, really vital.
So finally, when it comes to getting yourself ready for the migration, and probably one of the most important actually, is to get the right people in the room. This works on a lot of different levels. You've got a lot of different people throughout the organisation that might need to be involved. It's from a budgetary point of view, making sure that the right budget is approved and involved, and that you know who's making those decisions, but also from a resourcing point of view, to make sure that you've got the buy-in from that organisation, that they're going to be involved and they're going to help get the message out and bring people in and work with you.
Absolutely. I mean, the last project we worked on, the ownership of SharePoint Online was very, very murky, and it hindered us a lot. There were sort of an end user services team, a cloud computing team, a SharePoint Online team, a SharePoint 2007 team. Ownership of the product was, you know, it hadn't quite been decided when we got in there, and not knowing who to engage with and when, it meant having conversations maybe 3-4 times over, and you know, things get lost in translation. So getting the right people in the room early on so that you're all aligned and that you're all working towards the same goal as well is very, very important. Migration projects by their nature are quite disruptive, not very sexy, I've been told. I mean, jury's out. But you know, we want buy-in, and we want those teams to see that goal and actually want to work with us and be advocates in the business and be allies to us. And you know, when we turn around and say, can we have a desk from 9 PM Friday till 6 AM Monday? We want them to know why we want that and to help us out.
Absolutely. You've also got to be quite aware of the political situations that are going on inside companies, because there's always all sorts of office politics going on. Everything is political. And one of the things with migration projects, you've got an entire new platform coming in, and especially if it's an Office 365 migration, it can be a move from traditional IT, so sort of office-based, server-based IT, onto a cloud solution. Can involve entirely different people and entirely different people in the organisation who aren't used to working with each other either. So you can find yourself in a situation where you're helping to bring people together and get them talking for the first times and answering questions that they didn't even know they had at the time.
Absolutely.
So once you've got all that in place, you know the shape and the size of your migration, you know about what you're going to do. It's a question of how you're going to do it. Now, this can be kind of whenever you want. The joy of being able to do this analysis and find out all the stuff beforehand is you can take that migration. You know how long roughly that's going to take. I mean, no migration is ever perfect, and you always come up plenty of bumps on the road, but you have got a rough idea of how long that's going to take for you based on other things that we've done before. So you can fit that in based on your schedule. What you're doing in terms of a modern workplace, when's that coming on board, when do you want the migration to happen to best do that? Do you want that before, after Teams, during?
Yeah.
It might be a bit messy, as we've recently found out.
But that's something where we need to engage with the client. So, you know when your guys are going to be out of the business, or the quieter periods, or what projects are going on. So we can do that discovery and prep and analysis and say, look, this is what it looks like. This is our recommended approach. You kind of now need to tell us what's going to work in your business and kind of work with us to get things off the ground.
It's kind of key that,
or your chosen provider, of course.
even with a 2013 migration, it's a good idea to get this stuff in place now, get the analysis done now, so that you know what the size of the project is, and you have the time then to fit that in within the next few years. Because a migration project can run into years, and so it's best to be able to know when you're going to do that in the timeline.
Yeah. Liam's only 22.
What are you saying? I look older. So, you've thrown me off there.
Sorry.
That's not on the script, is it? So once we've got this, we know when to do it, we know when we're going to put it in. It's then a case of choosing what tools and how you're going to actually effectuate that migration and execute that migration. So from a very basic point of view, from a very technical point of view, you've got the sort of tools that are absolutely going to be doing the lifting and shifting and telling you when that's going to happen. You've got a myriad of tools on offer. Some of the bigger players are people like Metalogics, AvePoint and ShareGate, who do excellent migration tools, who are great for different purposes. So because you already know what sort of data you got and you've had a look, you can make a choice of which tool is going to suit you better. There's even tools from Microsoft now which are really, really quite decent, especially more for doing more simple migration, but it could be the one that works for you. And Microsoft provides lots of different tools that we use during the migration as well as being somewhere that we migrate to. Good example are things like Powerups and Forms, which we use for the user engagement, we use for collecting data, and we use for automating the movement of data between the lists that we have in terms of what people have on their system. So you have a block of sites that you know you've got about 10,000 sites to migrate. You've got to keep that in sync because we've got to know which one's going where. And the automation has really helped us do that without any trouble of human error and things like that creeping in. So the automation can be very useful in a migration project.
Yeah, those pesky humans. Definitely the automation piece has been quite a new factor of my role that I've had to get my head around, but I'm absolutely in love with it now. I love it. I love to sort of obviously map out that end user journey in a migration and define what we're going to communicate to people, but being able to use something like Power Automate at mass allows you to create really bespoke emails, send them at different times, stuff that would, historically have a change manager that you're paying £1,000 a day to sit there and make mail merges. It's getting the most from these consultants' time, and using automation means when that's happening and those comms being sent, I'm on the ground, I'm working with teams, I'm doing that stakeholder engagement, which is what you actually pay the experts to come in and do. I'm sure you've got internal comms that can sit and send emails. So it's really a great way to kind of, like Liam says, limit that human error, but at mass, it is usually really large quantities of people you're dealing with and they're not receiving the same information. Often it's quite bespoke emails with different links and different timelines and things like that. From an adoption point of view, so I'm a ProSci qualified change manager, and that the whole team is at WM. So that means the approach that we use is the ADCAR methodology, which I'll deliver another webinar on that on another day, but it's essentially taking users through a journey of change. And the basis of it is that you can't move to the next stage without going through the previous, so awareness comes before desire. And that's really important in something like a migration project because it's dependent on people coming on the journey with you. If you take their stuff and move it somewhere and they haven't gone on that journey with you, they'll find the right person to tell and get it changed back. So it's really very important. But also, if you are using this as an opportunity to adopt a new way of working and to create that modern workplace through Office 365, it's crucial that this first migration piece of getting people on there goes well. Another example of using automation in the adoption side of things is for a client recently, we built a training booking app. So again, that was all around getting the most out of the one change manager they had on the ground. If you've got sort of, 2,000 site owners across different locations, remote workers, some people are going to be on site, and how are you going to train all those people, or at least give them an opportunity to attend training? Having that app meant they could see all the times available, how many spots were left, whether it was online or if it was taking place in an office near them. They could book it. The automation from Power Automate sent them a calendar invite, and they knew when to be and where. And it was just, we got really great feedback on that because, training is one thing, but kind of if an event popped in my calendar from some random supplier tomorrow saying I had to attend training, probably wouldn't go. I wouldn't prioritise it, but being able to go and be proactive in that way, I think it made people feel enabled.
Yep, and it's great to hear someone on the change management side talking so passionately about automation, which is brilliant. It's normally the sort of thing that we talked about, but ultimately, to reverse the role slightly there, the ultimate tool that you've got to perform your SharePoint migration is the people involved, and that can be on your side, on the client side, and using those people in the right way to make sure that their time is freed up appropriately by the automation solution so that they can get on with doing things that are really human and the things that only really a human can do. Having a look at SharePoint sites and seeing how they look and feel to them, that they work correctly. That is really some of the most valuable stuff that you can put in and some of the best resource that you can get on the table at the beginning. So we talked about different types of content on your system. And there can be lots of different things that you find in your SharePoint environment. This means that, as I was saying before, things aren't just a straight migration. It isn't about just lifting and shifting all this data and putting it into one place. Some of that data might not be needed anymore. Some of that data might not be compatible. So we need to work out exactly what we're doing. And what we do with that is having different paths for different content. So this is an example of a recent migration that we've been through. Basically what we do is find out which content is able to migrate. So we test whether it's viable to migrate, and anything that isn't migratable, we remove that data and perform the migration. It's possible that some of that data isn't viable, so it becomes a new site, something new that we create altogether. Then we have quite an interesting path, and this is called the Remediation Path. So this is where we change things before migration. So things like, a good example of this is workflows. So workflows in 2007 are a very, very different beast to workflows in Office 365. Now you can of course still use a lot of the same workflows. You could migrate them across as they are, but the point is you don't really want to. That's not making the best use of the platform that you move into. You want to rewrite these workflows in Power Automate. You want to redo your forms using Powerups to make sure the user is getting the best user experience from Office 365. So what we do there is we can take the data and the documents that are associated with workflows and append them, wait until that fix is done, rewrite those solutions, create new solutions, and then perform the migration together. Now, this only accounted for like 4% of the sites that we were dealing with, but it's accounted for the majority of the time that we're using to do it. Because these simple migrations, they just sort of churn over, they take place very easily. This 4% is really where the time-consuming stuff happens and where the fun happens.
Yeah, we had a lovely client called the Migrate Path, the sausage factory.
Yep.
Because it was very much just about, it goes in one end, comes out as a site at the other end, which were the favourites in the project. But obviously, as Liam was saying, you've got these complex ones which were only 4% of the migration but took up most of the resource. And a lot of that resource is actually engaging with those site owners, understanding how they're using SharePoint, because each individual, they're using it very differently. Sometimes, and this might be something you need to think about, they've inherited it. They don't know why these custom things sit on that site. They just know it's there and it does something. So it's not always even that you're dealing with someone who knows why their site is the way it is. And I think what this shows, other than that migrations are quite scary, is that process is really, really important. There are instances where we think something's going through this path and it ends up complex. Is there a process around telling that site owner that they're now not migrating on that date? They're going through a completely different process now. And even from a technical point of view, the handing over of sites we thought were here that are now here. You know, delete path, if you're going to let people have an opportunity to migrate to online, how do these paths move from one another? So defining all those change journeys is a really fun experience that we've got experience in and we can help you with. But I guess it comes back to that point of there's no such thing as a clean migration, and that having those priorities set out help you make those decisions. If your priority is budget, and I'm down here in delete saying, oh no, the Cat Lovers Society must migrate, I'm pretty sure it's not going to come across because our priority is time and budget. So really good one to think about.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really good point in terms of the decommission path, choosing. So one of the choices and it seems quite obvious in here, there's just a choice between do we keep this or do we let it be decommissioned with the platform, and then sorting out some sort of retention solution on Office 365. But there's also the whole set of comms that comes along this path about whether it's going to be deleted, giving the users a warning that it's going to happen. These are older sites, how do we do that? Do we put up a banner on them? That's one thing that we've done. And then move into another path if they want to keep that. Has made things very complicated. So you've got lots of different endpoints for where this could end up. And you take that for different content as well. So when you're migrating or creating new things, this can also be on things like Yammer or Teams. And this is the point where you'd sort that out as well.
Cool. So if I've not spoke to you about change enough so far, I'm going to go into a bit more detail. So these are sort of the three key elements to at least the discovery part of my role in a migration. Impact assessments for a migration, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing a migration without them. It's basically sort of getting out on paper every impact of this migration, from my URL will change, I'll access it at a different point, my users who are accessing the site through favourites will have broken links, every impact, and then ensuring that you've got your comms strategy ready to address all of those impacts, and whether it's training that then needs to address those impacts or some stakeholder management that needs to address those impacts, you've got it out on paper and it just helps you make that plan. The next thing is the comms strategy, which, you know, it is more simple than T-minus comms, 100%. So for me, things that I've found is that you can't underestimate the impact of this change. And also, if it is coming from a historical platform like 2010, the level of understanding of really what SharePoint is and what its uses are. So a great example of this would be, we were working with a company and we were migrating site collections across so that people could have that sort of structure in the end state. And what was happening is we were communicating out, these sites are migrating, parent sites, sub-sites, and in some instances there might be a sub-site that can't come across. The site owner would be made aware of that, but because the level of understanding of SharePoint was quite minimal, it meant that we were getting queries saying, I've got pages missing on my site, where are all my pages? And then we spent resource looking for missing pages, and when we got to the bottom of it, it was sub-sites that hadn't migrated across. So that lack of understanding of how users actually communicate or what they perceive SharePoint to be meant we spent resource investigating things, querying tickets, and also people thinking that they hadn't migrated in some instances. So it's very, very important. And down to, you know, the things that come up in change projects all the time. So if it was nationwide and I say your site members, well, they're a building society, so they call their customers members, just little things like that, obviously, that probably crop up in every change project. And then your change strategy. For migrations to SharePoint Online, I think this can't be underestimated, because in a lot of instances it is the introduction to Office 365, and it is also going to be the piece where you're going to have to marry up. If that company is already on Teams, they need to know what the relationship between SharePoint Online and Teams is. If we're going to be mapping people to Teams, SharePoint and Yammer, the change strategy needs to make sure the education around that, the context around how those tools interact with one another is detailed. So that would be my advice when approaching the change aspects of a migration project. And then when you're actually in delivery mode, so just some kind of lessons learned from me on projects I've been on. So feedback, and more feedback. It isn't always good. In migrations, you tend to improve with every wave, we know this. But for me, in the training sessions and the feedback forms, I was getting new user cases that we hadn't found in the numbers that meant we could improve future waves. So we had just little bits of information about, we were using last modified as an indicator, and there were sites being accessed via the intranet, just the list, and therefore it wouldn't crop up in our last modified. So I'm getting a bit granular there, but it's just those little user cases that have to be human stories and human conversations. They come out of the woodwork in feedback. Agile training and comms, and this is just me kind of reiterating the point of, don't bother taking feedback if you aren't going to implement it. So the projects that we work on that are migrations that do have a robust change element, we are really heavy and do try and make the client brave enough to be agile in changing training and comms throughout the migration, and it does make a difference. So an example would be, we would do the training and everyone would be happy, but you know, 2,000 site owners, you get an hour's training. That's quite expensive in itself. But people were saying, this is great, but to be honest, what I'd like to do is just be able to come and say, I used to do this, show me how to do it now. They were used to quite like a Genius bar setup. So we started an all-day drop-in where you could literally walk over and get some information, and it really made a difference, and the feedback improved. And speak to your team. So the last point is, I guess, don't treat change and tech as two separate work streams on a migration project. things change all the time on migrations, to whether it's going to be things have gone wrong, we cannot send that T0 out, the sites aren't ready, to the sites have gone out, but actually I can't think of an instance, but things change all the time essentially, and you'll need ad hoc comms spinning up for postpone, you know, these sites didn't go through the sausage factory, we need to tell them. And if your change manager isn't kept up to date with these changes in process or approach, the information the information communicated out at training might not be correct, the communications they receive might not be correct, just for the sake of two people not having a conversation. But Liam's great.
It's true, I did do that.
Cool. This is just an example of how automation can work in a change process. I'm very proud of it because it is mine. But I wouldn't want to do another migration without being able to do this. It's really changed the way I approach changing comms. So Power Automate would be how you trigger all your emails. So the benefit of doing that is basically you can set out all your waves from a SharePoint list. So every site owner site and URL is detailed in that list. Power Automate can pick up that information, create a bespoke email and send it at those correct times. Down at T-15 days, they get access to the Power App, so they can go and book their own training when they want to go to it. Down to T0, where they've got their new link to their site, and then they can attend training, Classroom or on Teams. And we also had a Yammer group, which really has got a life of its own. So I've done a lot of projects where we've set up a support Yammer group, and there have been some quite sad instances where it's just me posting a tip every other week. But to be honest, the projects I've been on recently, people have been creating videos of their sites, really showing off on there, you know, peers giving advice and giving that support. You know, we still manage it, but an instance would be somebody asked how to create surveys in SharePoint Online, and you can still do it, and we gave that information, but somebody else had already said, have you tried using forms? And it was just a really nice thing to see. It was sort of leading people to other parts of Office 365. We also had forms in the earlier part of the end user journey, which was a way for us to collect information about site owners that would automatically link back to that SharePoint list. So what it means is that down at T1, when Liam and Jitesh are kind of looking at the blueprint of what they're doing, all that information's in there automatically. I've not had to have a conversation. I haven't had to do any data entry, which is a bonus for me. They've just got the plan. The plan lives and breathes on SharePoint. We also had banners as well. So the 2007 ones, there was some scripting involved, so I won't say that it's all out of the box, but where it could be, we have pushed for it to be out of the box. So they would get a banner saying this site is moving 10 days before, and that was to allow site members to know what was going on as well, because we had budget for site owners. And then they also got a redirect banner. So once they're in T0, the site is put to read only, and there's a banner on every page saying, look, this site is now read only, click here to go and see the new site. And also for site owners, we do something called, I'll get out of the way a bit, a validation period, which, depending on how much you know about migrations, I'll give you a whistle-stop tour. It's 48 hours after you migrate, we allow site owners to report issues. Microsoft only give you 24 hours, so we're quite generous. And the reason that it's so short is that if we have to roll you back, there is a risk of losing work that's happened in that time. So you want to keep it quite neat. And for your own resource, pay for us to stick around for 6 months fixing stuff if you want, but let's just keep it to that small window of time. The report and issue banner would appear on the new site. It was visible to site owners only, and they could click to report an issue, and that also fed into that SharePoint list. So everything lived in that one list, and I'm very proud of it because before this project, I'd never used any kind of automation, certainly not for change. And it was quite scary to me. Now, I'm not going to be building an app tomorrow, but I think it's definitely worth thinking about if it is an enterprise level migration where there is thousands of people impacted.
No, indeed, and we're all very proud of this because this is a really good usage scenario for Power Platform as well. And so I'm part of the Power Platform user group. I present there sometimes, and I presented this migration project to them last month, I think it was. And this slide, this was the point where everyone got out their cameras and took a picture of the slide, because it's a really interesting, novel way to use the Power Platform to drive the comms going forward and to make sure that you can reach out to everyone, rather than just having comms as sort of a sideline for a migration project is pretty vital.
Definitely.
So from that, our key takeaways from this webinar, we're going to wrap up now before we get any questions. One, there is no such thing as a clean migration. Migrations are chaos, and throughout the migration process you will come across lots and lots of different things going wrong, lots of problems, lots of people shouting, servers going down, all sorts of things.
That's just me.
They're really good fun, but be prepared for that. And be prepared to be able to change quite quickly on the fly. Make sure that your comms processes are solid, make sure that your team is solid, that you can weather these sort of things very well. That is a very, very important thing with any migration.
Oh no, mine's supposed to say alcohol. No. Expect the unexpected. So it kind of leads into what Liam was saying, but things will change during your migration. You know, Brexit might happen, a recession might happen. We think, because we're very precious, that this migration is all encompassing. I've been speaking about migrations for about 2 years and I'm single, so, you know. But there'll be bigger problems in your company, such, you know, it could be redundancies and things like that, and you will have to adapt on the fly. And that's why having those priorities set out early on help you adapt, because it's like, okay, this thing has happened, our driver is we've got to get off this platform in 2020, how can that still happen?
And so keeping with the theme of saying things twice, make sure that that is your gravity, your centre of gravity, that is your compass. The priorities that you set at the beginning, that was fantastically led in, I like that. Make sure that those priorities that you set, they guide you all the way through the project, and you should get through it fine. A little bit scarred, but fine.
Yeah, everyone's made it through so far. It's not that scary.
Well.
Cool. Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, so we've got one question here. So how difficult is it to create that app? Was it something that a change manager did?
Oh, very good question. I will be honest.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh yeah, I will repeat it. That amazing training app you brought up, Beth, really well done. How difficult was the training app to create, and did a change manager create it? So I would say no, I could have a stab at it, but I can't create Powerups. I can edit existing Powerups. I don't know why I'm talking about me. A change manager could edit an existing Powerup that's been built for things like copy changes, but they are simple. I think it was about a day and a half's effort from a junior developer. If somebody knows Powerups, it isn't too difficult to spin the app up. I think it's the work that goes into it fitting in that comms process that took a little bit longer. So when are we going to allow people to book the training? How long for? Thinking up those little things, such as make sure it shows how many spaces are left, because we've got classrooms that have only got 6 chairs in. So it's those considerations that actually take that bit longer. There are probably templates of apps sat on Microsoft Support Centre right now, but fitting that into your business takes a little bit longer.
Absolutely. Powerups are designed to be sort of low code, easy to use, easy to pick up, but there are still elements of complexity that go in there, and it's just going to be difficult to get your head around the logic that needs to come through.
Yeah. So change managers, we will take over Powerups, but we just need a bit more time.
So do we have any more questions from online?
Yep, we've got one more. So is the best way to migrate as fast as possible so everyone is on the platform at the same time?
It's a difficult question. It goes back to one of the 3 things that we were saying, whether the best way to migrate the quickest way to migrate, basically. And it depends on your priorities. If time is your priority, then yeah, that's definitely the best way to migrate. If you've got plenty of time, then no, you've got the freedom and the flexibility to spread that out a little more and to take your time and to make sure it's done correctly and that the user satisfaction is high, if that's your priority.
Yeah, and it depends on the usage. If you have sort of pockets of teams working together on sites, then there won't be such an urgency on other sites migrating. Whereas if it's something like an intranet, we would want to see an intranet migrated together so that people can get on there and use it as that full intranet as soon as possible. So user cases and priorities would be the deciding factors on that.
Cool.
Any others?
Should we do one more? So we've got, how do you deal with clients with rigorous compliance and retention policy needs? So you talked about prioritisation and different sites having to go through different streams. So how do you deal with retention?
So how do we deal with clients with rigorous compliancy and governance and retention policies?
Carefully.
Very carefully. They're our favourites, always. It's actually, that's where I think clients, we need to lean on them. They know their business more than us. We can build the solution around their needs. So it's that investigation piece up front, getting the right people in the room up front, whether it's GDPR or a customer information team, get them in the room early. Let's find out how we're doing it now. Does it need to improve? Does that sit within this project's responsibilities? And then we'll build the solution around it. But how do we deal with them? We just deal with them. Deal with everything.
Yeah. I think we're going to leave it there.
We've had enough of your questions. Sorry. Closed. Cool.
So thank you very, very much for joining online as well. I think there's a few more things to go through.
Yes. Obviously, migrations are so beautiful, but we do have our Fall in Love with the new Yammer event coming up. So we're in Manchester on the 24th of March and London on the 26th. And we'll be talking you through basically the new Yammer. Very, very exciting stuff. I went and met with the product owner and I'm very excited to be on a Yammer project very soon. So we'll have people from WM speaking, hopefully some client stories being shared as well, the ways that it might be able to spark ideation and get more from some of your people as well.
And if you've not been to one of these Fall in Love events, they are fantastic fun. We always have a lovely time with them and they're a great way to just get those initial conversations going and really get to talk to some of the experts in the field.
Yeah, and each other, clients getting to share stories with one another. Cool. And now for a bit of wrap up. So we will be sending a feedback form out to people. So thanks in advance if you do fill it out, please be kind. We're also going to be sending out a calendar of any more upcoming webinars we've got and any other events coming up. So pass that on in the business if there's anyone else who you think would get value from them. And also we will be sending contact details for anyone you might want to get in touch with if you want a bit more detail on planning your own migrations. So thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you.